Hey, welcome back to another video. I hope you're having a fantastic Monday. Today what we are talking about is different morphs seen in crested geckos. This is part 3 in our video series about buying your first crested gecko, and this is by far one of the funnest parts about getting a gecko is choosing what color it will be. Now if you're planning on going to Petco or PetSmart and picking out a gecko from there, this video isn't really going to apply to you because you're going to have a very limited selection of different colors and stuff like that. But if you are looking to go online, it's going to cost you a little bit more, but you are going to be able to choose pretty much any color you want. So I definitely recommend going online to get your first gecko. It's also a good experience, but we'll talk more about that in the buying crested geckos video, which is next after this one. Now you may be asking what a morph actually is, and I have decided to break it down into 3 parts. I think it represents what a morph is pretty well. You got your color morphs, you got your pattern morphs, and you got your trait morphs. Now this might sound confusing at first, but it's all going to make sense in just a minute here. So when buying your gecko, you're going to have to choose between one of these 3 kinds of morphs. And what I mean by this is some geckos are named by the amount of pattern they have. For example, an extreme harlequin means it has a lot of pattern, generally 75% up the sides, usually touching the dorsal or what they would call the back on your crested gecko. This is a pattern morph. So it doesn't matter what color this gecko is. It could have white pattern, it could have orange pattern. It does not matter. The amount of pattern is what matters, right? But you also have geckos that are named based on the amount of color they have. For example, a Halloween crested gecko could have little to no pattern, or it could have extreme harlequin patterning. It does not matter as long as the gecko is orange and black. That's why it gets its name, a Halloween. So that would be a color morph of crested gecko. And then you also have things that are called traits. Now these aren't necessarily morphs, but let's take a look at this Dalmatian crested gecko right here. You can see that it has all these nice black spots. It's very pretty actually, bright orange too. It's on a patternless gecko. And the Dalmatian is actually a trait rather than a morph. At least that's what I would like to call it. Some people will still say it's a Dalmatian like morph, if you could see my air quotes. But the Dalmatian trait can be found on any gecko. It could be found on an extreme harlequin. It could be found on a Halloween. Does not matter. The Dalmatian is rather a trait rather than a specific morph, if you know what I mean. It can be found on basically any sort of color or pattern gecko. Now I'm going to go over a couple different morphs here today. Hopefully you'll kind of find out what you like and what you don't like. I try to include a wide variety of different colors and patterns here. And all these geckos are under $500. Now I know that sounds like a lot, but there's only one that's on that $500 spectrum. Now a lot of these can be found for less than $200, which I feel is very reasonable for your first gecko, and a lot of it can be found for under $100. But I'm going to be including the starting price, what I like to say, down below in the corner of this video, so it'll say starting price this much. What I mean by that is, for example, our first gecko is a patternless animal. Now you can find these in orange, yellow, red, any kind of color pretty much. And the starting price on these animals is usually $40. So what I mean by that is when you see these for sale online, they're probably going to start at about $40 and they're going to go up from there. Obviously there'll be some cheaper examples, but this is just a price I feel like you can find a pretty average patternless animal at. Obviously ones that are orange or red are going to be in higher demand, which means the price will be higher, but you could still pick up a patternless red animal for $50 to $100, I would say, as a baby. And these are going by baby prices too, because babies are always cheaper than adults. So just keep that in mind when getting your first crested gecko too. Babies are always cheaper, and you'll be able to find a nicer gecko as a baby. One last thing to mention is that if you decide on a morph, make sure you go watch my video. Don't fall into this trap when buying crested geckos. That video is very important. If you haven't already seen it, I will leave a link down below in the description. That'll keep you from falling into what I like to call the morph trap, or the excessive labeling trap when getting your first crested gecko. We'll talk more about it in my buying video next week, but for now we're going to talk about some cool crested gecko morphs. So we've already talked about your patternless, which is pretty much your base animal. They're going to start out at around $40. But what if you want something a little bit more fancy, a little bit more cool looking? Well, you can move up into something like this extreme harlequin here, or just a regular harlequin, meaning that they have a decent amount of pattern, obviously the extreme having more than a regular harlequin. You can pick these up usually starting at about $75 or so, and these could have a lot of different kinds of patterns. They could be orange or cream or yellow. and they can have different base colors too, which is like the background pattern on the gecko. Usually it'll be brown or kind of like a light gray or black. So these are very cool animals, very good for a starter animal, and a lot of them, if you buy them as a baby, will develop more pattern as they get bigger. So that's also really cool to watch and see how they develop. These animals are very beautiful. You can get ones that are really high contrast, so they're bright orange and then have a black background. There's a lot of cool things with extreme harlequins. You could also get something like this tricolor here, which would probably start you at about $150. A tricolor meaning it has 3 equal parts of color. This is a pretty good example of one. It doesn't have that much white, but it will probably when it gets bigger. These geckos tend to be in high demand, so the prices on these may fluctuate, but if you look around long enough, you could probably pick one of these up pretty nicely for about $150. Moving on, we also have something like this Halloween here. A Halloween is characterized by its usually stark contrast, black and bright orange, usually not a lot of white on this animal. You will find a lot of people trying to advertise these as more brown geckos, but if you look around, you will find a really nice orange and black one. These also tend to be in high demand due to their contrast and their overall, beautiful looks generally. So it may be hard to find one of these, but trust me, once you get one and you see it in real life, you will fall in love with it. We also have something on the higher end of the spectrum if you're willing to, pass out a little bit more dough, something like these lily whites here. These are very beautiful animals. You have to really see them in real life to appreciate them. I understand that these aren't for everyone when getting your first crested gecko. I really wouldn't recommend spending $500 on an animal for your first time, but if you got money to blow, these are extremely beautiful. You will not be disappointed in a lily white. They are awesome animals. All crested geckos are awesome, but these are just extremely beautiful, nice white animals. Next up, we got your pinstripe. This is one of the more beginner morphs. You'll find a lot of these for sale, probably starting at about $75 or so. A pinstripe just has these 2 nice defined stripes going down its back. It could have a lot of pattern. It might not have that much pattern, but either way, you can tell a pinstripe right away if it has the unbroken clean lines. If you find one that has a part missing, then it is a partial pinstripe. And on the other side of the spectrum, you might find one that's called a quad stripe, which also has a line on either side of the gecko. So that would mean it has 4 stripes instead of just the 2, like the regular pinstripe. These are beautiful animals, and they are on the cheaper side now. You can pick one up probably about $75 or so. Like I mentioned earlier in this video, you also have Dalmatians. Now, a Dalmatian can technically be any gecko with any kind of spots, but the Dalmatian geckos that I'm talking about right now are ones that are patternless or mostly patternless with a lot of spots. You can also get what they call super Dalmatians, which are going to be a lot more expensive, but they also have a lot more spots. Your average baby Dalmatian could start out at about $60. It's also very likely you can find a baby Dalmatian at your local Petco or PetSmart or your local pet shop. So that's also something to keep in mind if you were buying a gecko from a pet store, but online they're going to start at about $60 too. Now, if you don't want a boring brown or black based crested gecko like some of the previous ones, you can find pattern based morphs, so like an extreme harlequin or like a lily white with a red base color. And what this means is it has the normal pattern color, but instead of being black or brown in the background, it will be red. So these geckos are going to be a little bit more because the red base coat is more desirable, but you can pick up some baby reds usually in the $100 to $200 range. So not too shabby at all, and you get the red coloring, which is always very beautiful. Now, the last type of geckos we have to talk about today are pet-only geckos, and geckos like this pop up from time to time. You may have seen them on Facebook if you're in any groups. What a pet-only gecko is it could be any morph technically. Could be a lily white, which is $500. It could be an extreme harlequin. It could be anything really, but it's pet-only, meaning it's probably a retired breeder if it's an adult, so it's an older animal, or it's a baby that has some sort of deformity. Maybe like it's my gecko Nemo here, who you can see has a bad leg. This would be a pet-only gecko. You don't want to breed something like this. Nothing wrong with them, by the way. They're just, probably a little bit disabled. Now, this might be a good option for someone who is looking for a less expensive option. Sometimes you can find these for free or very cheap because people want them to go to a good home who will care for them. And you can find sometimes very beautiful animals that are pet only and can't be bred. You may find some really nice reds that have like a spine kink or something. That was one I just seen a little while ago. But pet only geckos are great. If you see them on Facebook and they're not too badly like disabled, I know that's horrible to say, but you don't want one that's super like has MBD or something like that. which is a, kind of calcium deficiency issue. But like my gecko Nemo here, who is, has a bad leg, he was like that from birth. You can see he gets around just fine. It's just that you can't breed him, so he's not as valuable. I know that's horrible to say, but just keep an eye out for these geckos. If you join some Facebook groups, you may find one that you like, and that would be a good alternative if you're looking for a good gecko morph, but for a cheaper price. Anyway, these are just a select few of the morphs that I personally work with. There are a ton more out there. There's some morph guides on YouTube. If you're looking to see every little morph and every little trait, you could watch one of those videos and you'll be able to see all the different kinds of colors and patterns and traits that crested geckos have. But hopefully this video pointed you in the right direction of what kind of morph you'd like. You can also check out a website called MorphMarket. They have a wide variety of categories that you could look into, and you can see all sorts of different morphs. That's not necessarily the best example, but it's still worth a look. I have a link down below in the description to that, to my MorphMarket, but you can just go from there and go to the home screen and, look at all the geckos for sale. So next video is going to be talking about buying your first crested gecko. That is going to be the last video in this series. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Thank you guys for smashing the like button on my last videos. If you did enjoy this one, make sure you do leave a like and leave me a comment down below what your favorite morph is. Mine happens to be, at the moment, high whites and lily whites, but that may change in the future. I like reds. Honestly, I like everything. I like them all, but unfortunately you can't have them all. But anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in next week's video.